Grab your siege engines, Wargamers, because today we are doing another siege. This time, it's the defending forces of Sinistrea who have invested their smallish army at Forthright City, the capital of their rivals, Dextramania. They essentially said, oh, you want to invade and lay siege to my capital? Well, maybe I'll just invade and lay siege to your capital. You like apples, Dextramanians? How do you like them apples? The real question that we need to answer here today is, how long is this siege going to take? Because way up here in the north, this siege ended the day before. Because we are dealing with a Black Powder era war, we're in one of those strange situations where hostilities continue despite the fact that perhaps the king has already surrendered and signed terms. Taking a look at the grand strategic situation. Dextramania was planning on securing control of Sinistrea through a marriage plan that was foiled by the fact that the woman ran off with her prince. So this is yet another war that was caused by a woman. Forget people that say religion causes wars. It's women. That's just the way the world works. So the invasion that was launched by Dextramania was either a punitive raid or a means to recapture that expensive dowry, or perhaps that elopation. We're calling this the first elopation war, after all. Perhaps that's merely an excuse. You know, sometimes people will go to war and they'll say it's for one thing when it's really another. I'm looking at you, Civil War, and I'm looking at both you, North and South, so don't nobody get chippy. The point is, we don't really know why these guys are being so belligerent. All we know is that there's a war going on, and we need to resolve this knotty issue of what happens when you've got a city that has already won a war, but the besiegers don't know it. It's going to be about a 5-day ride for Messenger to get up and a 5-day for the Messenger to get back, which means we've got 10 days to figure out what happens, which is perfect because old Bill Sylvester here in the Solo Wargaming Guide uses 3 checkpoints, 5 days, 8 days, and 10 days to figure out what happens in a siege. He also uses a deck of cards, which is why this is sitting here. Hey, let me show my honesty and integrity by shuffling these, and I'm not good with a sleight of hand, so there we go. There we go. The deck is completely unstacked. So the siege continues for about a week. The first 5 days pass relatively uneventfully. That's not true. There's all kinds of events going on here. There are bastions being set up. There's sallies being made. There's sapping operations. There's counter-sapping operations. All kinds of good stuff. But that's outside the scope of what we're doing here today. What we do need to be aware of is that after 5 days, we have to check and see what the attackers and the defenders' supply situation was. Bear in mind, our attackers have a fairly long supply train here. It's almost a week's march back and forth. So they have to have a lot of wagons. And this city down here, Old Talberg, it's a village. Class E means it's very small. So we draw a card for... There we go. So that's the card I drew, and that's for the attackers who, on a 7, have all the food and ammunition they need. The defenders, on the other hand, have all the food and ammunition they need. So the siege continues for another 3 days, and then we need to figure out, this being the Black Powder era, for the attackers, well, I guess I should probably say before I draw the card, for the attackers, bad things happen. They have tainted water, and they will suffer 5% casualties per day. The defenders have the bubonic plague shows up, and they suffer 20% casualties per day. Now, in the course of this campaign, I've decided that you need to be 75% effective in order to maintain your fighting effectiveness. So the fact that the attackers are suffering 5% casualties per day, starting on the 8th, means that they will run out of water on the 13th. On the 13th. However, the defenders are going to run out of water on the 10th. Or, excuse me, they are going to suffer ferocious disease. The bubonic plague is going to claim by the 10th 40% of the population. Bubonic plague strikes, and 40% casualties mean the siege probably is going to end on the 10th. Let's take a look here real quick. The last card you have to draw is for the 10th, and that's this chart up here. And first we're going to draw for the defender, who, with a king, there's no effect on the siege. And for the attacker, we draw an 8, which means no effect on the siege. You can end the siege after 10 days with different casualty rates, right? Attacker stops after 75% casualty. So maybe the attacker sees the weakness. If I had drawn the 6 for the attacker, and he stops after 75% casualties, the way I'm reading these is that the siege is over, the attacker is lost, he's suffered 75% casualties, and the survivors have to lick their wounds and head on home. As things stand, because of the plague that hits on the 10th, which is the very day that the word arrives of the defeat of the Northern Army, the Southern Army manages to lift the siege, to break the defenders at the Fourth Reich City. So you've got two capital cities that have now been captured, and the campaign might be over. They might sign a very European treaty. Hey, let's just forget all this ugliness ever happened. But on the strategic level, we have to look at one other thing. Now that we know what happened here, we got to turn the clock backwards to look at something else. Let's turn our attention to the north and look at the strategic situation up here. Army Group 2, led by Commander von Kriegspiel, has arrived 3 days previously at Baybury and begun to besiege this port city. That is significant because he has received word a couple of days earlier. We decided that he was going to receive word the day before. So basically, the 6th, the 7th, we'll call it the morning of the 7th, just as he finishes setting up his besieging army around Baybury, a messenger, it's going to take that messenger a couple of days. So yeah, the very next day, it'll actually reaches von Scar. The news is going to reach on the 8th. That's when it will reach von Kriegspiel. That there's an army attacking his capital city. And we know, having already done that siege, that Fourth Reich City is going to fall in just 2 days, which is not even enough time for this army to get back to Leftopolis and unite with the major army. That makes things really complicated. And I'm going to be honest here. I don't know how to resolve this. This is where I need your guys' help, because I don't have enough grounding in the history of the Black Powder era to understand what would happen if you've got a situation like this, where you've got a siege set up here, you've got a capital that's fully invested. I guess the real question we have to ask ourselves is, what happened to the king of Sinistrea? Did he escape the city before the siege? Is he now ruling from Middleborough? We probably should have established that before. If he fled to Baybury, which he probably did, took a boat up here to Middleborough maybe, he may be in a better position for negotiating, but I'm not sure. As usual, if it were entirely up to me, I would refer to the dice. But I'd like to hear from you guys now. What do you think is going to happen in an imaginations, a Black Powder kind of pre-Napoleonic era, where you've got this kind of knot to resolve? I mean, the way of resolving this Gordian knot is to cut it, but nuclear weapons won't be invented for another 200 years. That doesn't help us out a whole lot. So go ahead, leave a couple of comments. If you guys have any opinions on how to resolve this, I would love to hear it. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and turn all of these thorny, knotty notes into a decent, coherent war journal, I guess you could call it. I've got my pretty. It's a journal. It's not a diary. It's a journal. Anybody that tells you otherwise is, they don't know what they're talking about. So that's all I've got for today. I had a great time working through the opening stages. Unfortunately, this book, Solo Wargaming Guide, only generated one tabletop battle. I was hoping for a little bit more than that. That might be an artifact of how we designed our map as a node-to-node with slowdowns at all of these little checkpoints. Maybe it's on me. I'm not complaining. I'm just pointing out that the ultimate goal of generating organic battles really only generated one, and let's be honest, it was interesting, but it wasn't a fair fight. It was pretty much a foregone conclusion, so I'm not sure how this works. I may have to work through another campaign, but in the meantime, we are hot and heavy into the Tony Bath-style War of the Trojan Succession over at trojanwar.blogspot.com. Give it a look. Let me know what you think. I need your help, guys. Meantime, I'm praying for you.